Kim Dae-ho tried his best not to fall asleep in the back row of his advanced galactic politics class. The 18-year-old human exchange student from Seoul never thought he would be sitting in a classroom with aliens from 12 different species. The morning sun of Centauri Prime shone through the massive windows, making the crystal walls sparkle like diamonds. His roommate Park Jin-woo always told him he was the luckiest human in the galaxy to get accepted into Centauri Prime University. The most famous school in known space only took the best students from every world. Dae-ho still could not believe he made it here after growing up in a small apartment in Seoul, where his father worked at a factory and his mother cleaned offices. Professor Velkor stood at the front of the classroom talking about trade agreements between distant star systems. The tall, blue-skinned Altarian had been teaching for over 100 years, and his voice had a way of making even the most exciting topics sound boring. Dae-ho glanced at his digital notepad where he had written only 3 sentences in the past hour. Around him sat the strangest collection of beings he had ever seen. Lee So-min, another human exchange student from Busan, sat in the front row taking perfect notes like always. She came from a rich family and had the best grades among all the human students. Her black hair was always perfectly arranged, and she wore expensive clothes that made other students stare. Behind So-min sat Choi Min-ho, a third-year human student who had been on Centauri Prime for 2 years already. Min-ho liked to brag about how well he knew alien culture and how he was practically an expert on galactic politics now. He often looked down on newer students like Dae-ho and made jokes about people from poor families. The alien students barely paid attention to the humans. Most species in the galaxy saw Earth as a young, backward world that had only joined the Galactic Alliance 50 years ago. The insectoid Kef clicked their mandibles in patterns that Dae-ho had learned meant they were bored. Their 6 legs tapped against the floor, while their compound eyes stared at the ceiling. The crystalline Luxians were even stranger. They had no fixed shape but flowed like living glass. Their bodies shimmered with colors that changed based on their emotions. Right now, they glowed with dull blue and purple colors, which meant they found the lecture uninteresting. Dae-ho had spent weeks learning to read their color language. In the corner sat 3 Dracos, the reptilian species that reminded Dae-ho of the dragons from old Korean stories. Their scaled skin was dark green, and their yellow eyes never seemed to blink. They tapped their long claws against their metal desks while their forked tongues flicked out to taste the air. The sound made Dae-ho nervous even after months of sharing classes with them. Professor Velkor droned on about shipping routes and tax policies between the Rigel Federation and the Vegan Commonwealth. Dae-ho found his mind wandering to thoughts of home. He missed his grandmother's cooking and the sound of traffic in Seoul. The artificial atmosphere of Centauri Prime always felt too clean and perfect compared to the crowded streets where he grew up. Through the massive windows, he could see the capital city of New Centauria stretching toward the horizon. Gleaming towers reached up to touch the purple sky while flying vehicles moved between them like schools of fish. The twin suns cast double shadows that still looked strange to Dae-ho after 6 months on this world. Everything was so different from Earth, where humans had to work hard just to survive. Each day on Centauri Prime felt like living in a dream. The food came from machines that could create any flavor. The buildings cleaned themselves. The weather was always perfect because giant machines controlled the climate. Sometimes Dae-ho wondered if he really belonged here among beings who had mastered space travel when his own species was still fighting wars and polluting their home planet. Maybe the other students were right to ignore the humans. Maybe Earth really was too primitive to matter in galactic affairs. The morning continued, with Professor Velkor explaining complex treaties that had been signed before Dae-ho was born. The Altarian teacher seemed to enjoy showing off his knowledge of historical events that spanned centuries. Dae-ho tried to take notes but found himself drawing pictures of spaceships instead. Lee So-min raised her hand to ask a question about trade regulations. The professor smiled and praised her for paying attention. Choi Min-ho rolled his eyes and whispered something to the student next to him. Dae-ho caught the words poor and soul and felt his face turn red with embarrassment. The Kef students clicked louder now, showing their annoyance with the slow pace of the lecture. One of them spread its wings briefly before folding them back against its body. The Luxians had turned almost completely gray, which meant they were falling asleep while still standing up. Daeho checked the time display on his desk. Only 30 minutes left until lunch break. He planned to eat with Jinwoo in the human section of the cafeteria where they served food that actually tasted like something from Earth. Most alien food was too bland or too spicy for human taste buds. The classroom felt warm and stuffy despite the advanced air systems. Daeho could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet moments between the professor's words. He thought about the military training he had completed back on Earth before coming to university. All young Korean men had to serve, but the skills seemed useless here in this peaceful academic setting. Professor Velkor moved to a new topic about cultural exchange programs between different species. He mentioned how important it was for young beings to learn about other worlds and ways of thinking. Daeho wondered if the professor really believed that, or if it was just something teachers were supposed to say. The twin suns reached their highest point in the purple sky, flooding the classroom with golden light. The crystal walls caught the rays and scattered them into rainbow patterns that danced across the ceiling. Some of the alien students seemed mesmerized by the light show, but Daeho had seen it many times before. Lee So-min continued taking detailed notes, her stylus moving quickly across her digital. Pad Choi-min-ho had given up pretending to pay attention and was reading something on his personal communicator. The Dracos in the corner had started a quiet conversation in their hissing language. Daeho felt his eyelids getting heavy. The combination of warm sunlight, boring lecture, and comfortable chair was making him drowsy. He fought to stay awake, knowing that falling asleep in class would bring shame to all human students. The last thing he wanted was to give the aliens another reason to look down on Earth. Then everything changed in a single heartbeat. The classroom walls began flashing bright red as emergency sirens wailed throughout the campus. Professor Velkor stopped talking mid-sentence, his blue skin turning pale white. The peaceful morning shattered like glass as alarm sounds filled the air. Through the massive windows, Daeho saw dark shapes descending from the sky. These were not the sleek passenger ships he was used to seeing, but angular warships with sharp edges and glowing weapon ports. They moved in perfect formation, blocking out the twin suns and casting the city into shadow. The Zephyrian Empire had come to Centauri Prime. 3 months after the invasion began, the Galactic Alliance fleet finally arrived at Centauri Prime. Admiral Serven, commanding the largest military force in Alliance history, expected to find a conquered world under complete Zephyrian control. Instead, he discovered something that would change galactic warfare forever. The Zephyrian invasion force, which should have moved on to other targets weeks ago, remained trapped on Centauri Prime, like animals caught in a net. Their casualties had reached 40% not from major fleet battles, but from thousands of small engagements that wore them down day by day. Their supply lines suffered constant attack, making it impossible to maintain proper equipment and ammunition. Their communication networks faced daily sabotage, leaving commanders unable to coordinate with their forces. Most surprisingly, civilian populations across the planet actively resisted occupation instead of accepting defeat like other conquered worlds. Admiral Serven was a member of the Thessarian species, whose people had dominated galactic military thinking for over 1,000 years. His pale green skin and 6 arms marked him as one of the most experienced fleet commanders in known space. Yet he found himself completely puzzled by what he discovered on Centauri Prime. Daeho met the Admiral in the same underground bunker where the guerrilla campaign had begun months earlier. The young Korean man looked older now, hardened by constant warfare and narrow escapes from death scars marked his hands and face, telling stories of close combat and desperate battles. But his eyes still held the same calm intelligence that had first impressed his professors back when he was just a sleepy exchange student, trying not to fail galactic politics. The transformation amazed everyone who had known him before the war began. Admiral Serven had studied every major military campaign in galactic history. He understood tactics, strategy, and logistics better than almost any being alive. Yet he admitted that he could not explain how humans fought so differently from every other known species. The question that puzzled military scholars across the galaxy was simple. Why did humans see opportunities where other species saw only defeat? What made them continue fighting when victory seemed impossible? What drove them to create new tactics that broke every rule of conventional warfare? Daeho explained the answer in words that would be quoted in military academies. For generations to come, humans came from a world where warfare never stopped. Earth's history consisted of constant conflict between tribes, nations, religions, and ideologies that lasted for thousands of years. While other species achieved peace early in their development and then joined the galactic community, humans continued fighting each other long after discovering space travel. Every human world still maintained military forces, and most human civilians received some form of combat training. This endless conflict had created evolutionary pressure that shaped human thinking in unique ways. Natural selection favored humans who could adapt quickly to new threats, find creative solutions under pressure, and refuse to surrender even when facing overwhelming odds. Jin Wu added insights that amazed the assembled military leaders. Human culture celebrated individual initiative and creative problem-solving in ways that other species did not. Where aliens saw chaos and guerrilla warfare, humans saw flexibility. Where others saw defeat and asymmetrical conflict, humans saw different paths to victory. Li So-min presented intelligence data that proved the effectiveness of human tactical thinking. The resistance campaign had not only saved Centauri Prime but inspired successful uprisings on 14 other invaded worlds. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed unstoppable 3 months ago, now faced rebellion across their entire invasion zone. Her analysis showed that human-led resistance movements were achieving casualty ratios of 10-1 against professional Zephyrian forces. Small groups of poorly equipped civilians were defeating trained soldiers through superior tactics and unbreakable determination. Choi Min-ho, who had transformed from a frightened student into a capable resistance leader, explained how human communities supported the war effort. Human families provided safe houses, food, and medical care to fighters. Human merchants disrupted enemy supply lines. Human workers sabotaged occupied facilities. This total commitment to resistance was something Zephyrian planners had never encountered before. Other species either fought formal battles or surrendered completely. Humans seemed incapable of accepting defeat and would continue fighting using any available means. The final offensive against remaining Zephyrian positions began at dawn. Admiral Serven coordinated the space battle while Daeho led ground forces that had grown from 20 university students to over 10,000 resistance fighters drawn from dozens of species. The battle was fierce but brief. Enemy forces that had been worn down by months of guerrilla attacks could not stand against a coordinated assault by fresh, alliance troops combined with experienced resistance fighters. Within hours, Zephyrian commanders requested terms for surrender. The surrender ceremony took place in the same plaza where Daeho had led his first desperate attack against the enemy. Command Post General Yaxmore of the 3rd Zephyrian Fleet formally surrendered his forces to a human exchange student who 3 months earlier had been falling asleep in politics class. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than the speed of light. The Zephyrian Empire, which had conquered hundreds of worlds over centuries, had been defeated by a species that most aliens considered primitive and barbaric. The balance of power in the galaxy shifted overnight. In the aftermath of victory, Daeho received offers from military academies across known space. His tactical innovations would be studied for generations. The Korean exchange student who just wanted to study politics had become one of the most famous military minds in galactic history, but Daeho surprised everyone by choosing to return to his studies, though now he focused on military strategy rather than politics. He understood that humanity's role in the galaxy had changed forever. Earth was no longer seen as a minor member of the Alliance, but as a military power that other species both respected and feared. The story ended where it began, in a university classroom. But this time, Daeho stood at the front as the professor. Students from dozens of species listened as he explained the principles of asymmetrical warfare and human tactical thinking. In the front row sat a young Zephyrian, one of the first from that species to study at an Alliance university since the war ended. The message was clear. To everyone in the galaxy, humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple refusal to surrender when faced with impossible odds. The quiet exchange student who became a war hero represented everything that made humans both dangerous and valuable. His legend would inspire human military doctrine for centuries to come. reminding the galaxy that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most ordinary people who find extraordinary courage when their moment arrives. The boy from Sol who fell asleep in class had awakened something in humanity that would echo through the stars forever. General Carthon, now serving as military advisor to the Alliance High Command, often told young officers that the greatest lesson of the Centauri Prime campaign was not about tactics or strategy. It was about the power of never giving up, even when victory seemed impossible. That lesson, written in the courage of human students, would guide the galaxy through whatever challenges lay ahead in the vast darkness between the stars. The underground shelters beneath Centauri Prime University were never meant to hold this many beings at once. Deho found himself pressed against hundreds of terrified students from across the galaxy. The air felt thick and hard to breathe as ventilation systems struggled to keep up with the demand. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the metal walls, making everything look like a nightmare. Above them, the sound of explosions echoed through the ground. Each blast made the entire shelter shake and sent dust falling from the ceiling like snow. Many students were crying or making the horrible sounds their species made when afraid. The KEF students huddled together, clicking their mandibles so fast it sounded like machinery. Breaking down, the Luxians had turned a sickly gray color that Deho had never seen before. In all his months studying their color language, he never learned what gray meant, but seeing it now, he understood. It meant pure terror. Their crystal bodies flickered weakly like dying lights while they pressed themselves against the walls. Somin sat beside Deho, trying to contact her family back on Earth. Her hands shook as she worked her communicator, but no messages would go through the communication. Networks were completely jammed. Nothing was getting in or out of the star system. Her expensive clothes were now wrinkled and dirty from the rush to the shelters. Choi Minho paced back and forth near the shelter entrance, muttering under his breath about how he should have stayed on Earth instead of coming here for his advanced degree. His confident attitude from the classroom had disappeared completely. Now he looked like a scared child who wanted to go home to his mother. The sound of weapons, fire grew louder overhead. Each energy blast that hit the surface sent vibrations through the shelter floor. Deho could feel the impacts in his bones. The familiar weight of fear settled in his stomach. But something else was there too. Something he recognized from his military training back home. Park Jin-woo finally pushed through the crowd to reach his roommate. Jin-woo looked pale, but his eyes were sharp and focused. Unlike the other students, he seemed to be thinking clearly despite the chaos around them. When their eyes met, both young men shared a look that needed no words. Both had served in the Korean military before coming to university. They understood what war meant in ways their classmates could never imagine. The sounds of battle above were not just noise to them, but information about what kind of weapons were being used and how the fighting was going. The shelter's emergency broadcast system crackled to life with static and interference. When the voice finally came through clear, it belonged to Chancellor Moore Aiden, the respected Centaurian leader who ran the university. His words hit the crowded shelter like physical blows. The Zephyrian Empire had not just attacked Centauri Prime. 17 major worlds across the Galactic Alliance were under simultaneous assault. The university's defense forces had been overwhelmed in the first wave. Enemy troops were now landing on the surface and moving toward population centers. The news got worse with each sentence. The planetary defense grid was offline. Most of the Alliance fleet was too far away to help quickly. The few ships in the system were either destroyed or retreating. The enemy had achieved complete surprise and overwhelming force. Around Deho, the alien students reacted with despair that seemed to crush their spirits. The Dracos hissed and showed their fangs, but their aggressive display looked more like fear than anger. The Kef clicked in patterns that sounded like mourning songs. Their compound eyes reflected the emergency lights like broken mirrors. Professor Velcor made his way through the crowd toward the human students. His blue skin had turned almost white, and his hands trembled as he spoke. The campus security chief, Comcel, had been killed defending the main gate. The remaining security forces were scattered and without leadership. The professor explained something that surprised everyone in the shelter. Humans had a reputation among military scholars across the galaxy. Earth was a young world that had only joined the Galactic Alliance 50 years ago, but human military tactics were already becoming legendary. Stories had spread through military academies about how humans fought differently than other species. They saw patterns in combat that others missed. They adapted to new situations faster than anyone expected. They refused to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. Dae-ho felt every eye in the shelter turning toward the small group of human students. The weight of expectation pressed down on him like the atmosphere of a heavy world. Lee So-min looked terrified at the idea of taking charge of anything. Her perfect grades in political theory meant nothing when plasma bolts were flying overhead. Choi Min-ho immediately started making excuses about why he could not help. He talked about his important studies and how he was not trained for combat situations. His voice got higher with each excuse, until he sounded like he was about to cry. But Park Jin-woo stepped forward without hesitation. He told Professor Velcor that he would help coordinate the defense of the university. His voice was calm and steady, despite the chaos around them. After a moment of looking at his roommate, Dae-ho joined him. The two young Korean men found themselves facing a group of university security guards, maintenance workers, and a few brave students from various species. They had basic energy weapons, limited power cells, and no real military equipment. Against them was coming the most feared military force in known space. The Zephyrian Empire was famous throughout the galaxy for their brutal efficiency in warfare. They conquered worlds not to rule them, but to strip them of resources and move on to the next target. They took no prisoners and showed no mercy to civilians. Their soldiers were trained from birth to kill, without hesitation. Professor Velcor led them to the shelter's weapon storage area. The university kept a small armory for security purposes, but it was never meant to equip a real military force. The energy rifles looked old and worn. The power cells were half depleted. The body armor was designed for crowd control, not battlefield combat. Dae-ho picked up one of the rifles and checked its power level. The weapon felt familiar in his hands despite being alien technology. All energy weapons worked on similar principles, and his military training had covered the basics. The rifle was lighter than the weapons he trained with on Earth, but the balance felt right. Park Jin-woo gathered the volunteers around a holographic display of the university campus. The three-dimensional map showed buildings' pathways and defensive positions in glowing blue lines. He began explaining his plan for defending the communication center in the main administrative building. The alien volunteers listened with expressions of disbelief on their faces. The plan seemed impossible to them. A handful of students and workers against a professional army was suicide. But something in Jin-woo's voice made them want to believe. Something about the way humans talked about warfare was different. Lee So-min surprised everyone by speaking up with tactical suggestions she had been quietly studying the university's layout and noticed weak points in the enemy's most likely approach routes. Her fear was still there, but she was thinking past it to focus on practical problems. Even Choi Min-ho stopped making excuses and began contributing ideas. His knowledge of the university's systems and layout proved valuable for planning defensive positions. His hands still shook, but his voice grew stronger as he talked about protecting their temporary home as they prepared to leave the shelter and face the enemy. Dae-ho felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. The quiet exchange student who just wanted to study politics was about to become something he never imagined. The sound of approaching aircraft overhead told them their time was running out. War had found them, and somehow they had become exactly what this desperate moment needed. The victory at the university command post sent shockwaves across Centauri Prime like ripples in a pond. News spread through the resistance networks that a small group of students led by human exchange students had defeated an entire Zephyrian company. For the first time since the invasion began, people across the planet dared to hope. Dae-ho found himself thrust into a role he never imagined possible. Military commanders from across the Alliance contacted him through the restored communication systems. They wanted to know how untrained human students had accomplished what seasoned warriors could not. The answer seemed to lie in something deep within human nature that even humans themselves did not fully understand. The communication center buzzed with activity as reports came in from across the planet. Resistance groups that had been hiding in fear were now launching attacks against Zephyrian positions. The story of the university battle had spread like wildfire, inspiring beings who had given up to start fighting back. General Carthon, the highest-ranking Alliance military officer still alive on Centauri Prime, requested an urgent meeting with the human students. The old Centaurian warrior had fought in campaigns across the galaxy for over 200 years. He had seen every major species in combat situations, but he admitted that he had never witnessed anything like what the humans had demonstrated. The meeting took place in a hidden bunker, deep beneath the capital. City of New Centauria representatives from 6 different species attended, including leaders from every surviving resistance group. The air in the bunker felt thick with tension and desperate hope. General Carthon was an impressive figure, even for a Centaurian. His purple skin bore scars from dozens of battles, and his forearms moved with the precision of a trained fighter. His large black eyes had seen the rise and fall of civilizations across the stars. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. The general explained the situation with brutal honesty that made everyone in the bunker fall silent. The Zephyrian invasion fleet consisted of over 3,000 ships spread across 17 star systems. Alliance reinforcements were still weeks away, traveling at maximum speed from distant sectors. Unless something changed dramatically, Centauri Prime would fall within days. The enemy had overwhelming superiority in numbers, weapons, and tactical position. They controlled all major cities and military installations. Their ground forces were digging in for a long occupation. This was when Park Jin-woo made a suggestion that would change the entire course of the war. He proposed that instead of defending fixed positions and waiting for rescue, the resistance should go on the offensive. Small mobile groups should strike at enemy supply lines, communication centers, and isolated outposts. The goal was not to win major battles, but to disrupt the enemy's plans and force them to spread their forces thin. By hitting targets across the planet simultaneously, they could create chaos that would delay the Zephyrian timeline and buy time for Alliance reinforcements. The alien military leaders objected immediately to this radical proposal. Guerrilla warfare was considered dishonorable by most galactic species. Civilized beings fought open battles with clear rules of engagement. The idea of hiding, striking without warning, and melting back into civilian populations seemed barbaric. Commander Yulsek of the Altarian forces argued that such tactics would bring shame to their ancestors. Captain Mordine of the Draconian Guard hissed that only cowards fought from shadows. The Luxian representative flashed angry, red colors that showed their disgust with the human proposal. But Lee So-min supported the plan with tactical insights that surprised everyone in the bunker. She had been studying Zephyrian invasion patterns from their previous conquests and noticed something crucial. Their entire strategy depended on rapid conquest and quick movement to the next target. The Zephyrians expected to control Centauri Prime within 1 week, then move most of their fleet to attack other worlds. A prolonged guerrilla campaign would force them to commit resources they could not spare and delay their broader conquest plans across 17 star systems. Choi Min-ho added another element that made the plan even more effective. He suggested recruiting human civilians living on Centauri Prime to join the resistance. There were over 50,000 humans on the planet, including families, merchants, and workers. Most had received basic military training on their home worlds. These civilians represented a resource the Zephyrians had not planned for in their invasion calculations. Human settlers were scattered across the planet in small communities that knew the local terrain better than any occupying army could learn in months. General Carthon listened to the human students with growing amazement. Their tactical thinking was unlike anything in standard military doctrine, yet it made perfect sense when explained properly. The old warrior had spent his life studying warfare, but these young humans saw angles he had never considered. The decision that followed would echo through galactic history for centuries. General Carthon placed the human students in charge of organizing the entire guerrilla campaign across Centauri Prime. Dae-ho became coordinator for all resistance activities in the northern continent. Park Jin-woo took responsibility for southern operations. Lee Somin was put in charge of intelligence gathering and communication between resistance groups. Her ability to analyze enemy patterns and find weaknesses had proven invaluable. Choi Min-ho would handle recruitment and training of civilian volunteers using his knowledge of human communities. The campaign that followed demonstrated human warfare at its most creative and effective. Small teams of fighters struck at Zephyrian positions like lightning, then disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Supply convoys found their routes blocked by destroyed bridges and collapsed tunnels. Communication towers exploded in the night, leaving enemy forces isolated and confused. Fuel depots burned for days, filling the sky with black smoke that could be seen from orbit. Water treatment plants shut down, forcing the occupiers to bring in supplies from their ships, the Zephyrian. Commanders trained in conventional warfare between organized armies struggled to adapt to this new kind of conflict. They held the major cities and military installations, but they could not control the countryside. Their invasion timeline fell, further behind schedule with each passing day. More importantly, the success of human-led resistance groups inspired similar movements on other invaded worlds. Across 17 star systems, beings who had given up hope began fighting back. The tide of war started to turn, not through massive fleet battles, but through countless small victories. General Yaxmore of the 3rd Zephyrian Fleet sent urgent messages to his superiors, requesting additional troops and supplies. The conquest that should have taken 1 week had stretched into months with no end in sight. His forces were taking casualties daily from an enemy they could barely see on the planet. Vega. 7 human colonists used mining equipment to collapse tunnels and trap enemy patrols underground on Rigel 4. Human merchants organized boycotts that shut down the economy and made occupation impossible. Human families on Alpha Centauri turned their homes into safe houses for resistance fighters. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds using the same brutal tactics, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. Every human world they attacked became a center of resistance that spread to neighboring systems like a virus. Dae-ho, the quiet exchange student who had been falling asleep in politics class, now commanded resistance operations across an entire continent. His tactical innovations were being studied and copied by military academies throughout Alliance space. The legend of human determination had begun as reports of successful attacks poured in from across the galaxy. One thing became clear. The Zephyrian Empire had awakened something in humanity that would reshape the balance of power among the stars forever. The surface of Centauri Prime University looked like the end of the world. Smoking craters marked where Zephyrian plasma bombs had struck the ground. The beautiful crystal spires that housed lecture halls now stood broken and twisted like broken bones. Bodies of fallen defenders lay scattered across the once peaceful campus grounds. Dae-ho led their small group of 20 defenders through the wreckage toward the main administrative building. Black smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The twin suns were blocked by clouds of dust and debris, turning the day into a gray nightmare. The sound of distant explosions echoed across the ruined campus park. Jinwoo moved beside him, checking corners and doorways with the skill of someone trained for urban combat. Their plan was simple but dangerous. If they could reach the communication center in the administrative building, they could coordinate with other resistance groups and call for help from the Alliance fleet. Behind them followed the strangest army ever assembled. Professor Velcor carried an energy rifle that looked too big for his thin blue arms. 2 Altarian security guards named Kolmar and Zintel whispered prayers to their ancient gods. A maintenance worker called Grix, who belonged to a species Dae-ho had never seen before, dragged a portable power generator. Lee So-min had surprised everyone by volunteering to come with them. She carried a small scanner that could detect enemy movements, and her fear seemed to have transformed into cold determination. Even Choi Min-ho had joined them, though he stayed at the back of the group and jumped at every sound. The Zephyrians had established their command post in the central plaza where students used to gather. Between classes, Dae-ho counted at least 40 enemy soldiers through his rifle scope. They looked exactly like the pictures in military textbooks: humanoid sharks with gray skin, black eyes, and rows of sharp teeth that could bite through metal. Their weapons were advanced plasma rifles that could cut through most known materials. Their armor was thick and covered with spikes designed to intimidate enemies. Each soldier stood over 2 meters tall and moved with the predatory grace of born killers. They had conquered dozens of worlds with these same tactics. The Altarian security guards looked at the enemy force with obvious terror. Kolmar whispered that it was impossible to defeat such numbers with their small group. Zintel suggested they retreat and hide until the Alliance fleet arrived. The other alien defenders nodded in agreement. This was when the difference between humans and other species became clear. While the aliens saw an impossible situation, Daeho and Park Jin-woo saw opportunities. They noticed things that the others missed, details that could be turned into advantages. The Zephyrian command post sat in a natural depression surrounded by raised walkways. This created what military tacticians called a kill zone, where defenders could fire down at enemies from multiple directions. The aliens had superior numbers and firepower, but they had positioned themselves poorly. Park Jin-woo pointed out that the enemy soldiers were bunched together instead of spreading out properly. They felt safe because of their overwhelming advantage, but this made them vulnerable to coordinated attacks from unexpected directions. Their confidence had made them careless. Ho studied the broken buildings around the plaza and saw cover routes that the enemy had not considered. The crystal spires that lay shattered across the ground created natural barriers and hiding spots. A small force could use these to approach unseen if they moved carefully. The plan that Jin-woo suggested made the alien defenders gasp in shock. He wanted to split their tiny force into 3 groups. One group would create noise and distraction on the east side of the plaza. Another would circle around to attack from the west using the damaged buildings as cover. The third group, led by Daeho, would wait for the distraction to begin, then attack straight through the center of the plaza while the enemy was looking elsewhere. It was the kind of plan that required perfect timing and incredible luck to work. Professor Velkor objected immediately. The plan was suicide. He argued humans could not possibly succeed where trained military forces had failed. The Zephyrians were too strong, too well equipped, and too experienced in warfare. They would slaughter the university defenders without mercy. But something amazing happened that changed everything. Lee So-min stepped forward to support the plan. She had been studying the enemy positions through her scanner and discovered something important. The Zephyrian command post had a blind spot on the north side where fallen debris blocked their view. This blind spot created a perfect approach route for a small group. The enemy had not bothered to post guards there because they thought the rubble made it impassable. But humans were smaller and more flexible than Zephyrians. They could crawl through spaces that the big aliens could not see or reach. Choi Min-ho, who had been silent and frightened, suddenly volunteered to lead the diversionary attack. His voice shook, but his eyes showed new determination. The transformation surprised everyone. The scared student had found courage he did not know he possessed. The change in all the human students amazed their alien companions. Under pressure, humans seemed to become something different. They thought faster, adapted quicker, and saw possibilities that others could not imagine. It was like watching peaceful creatures turn into predators. Grix, the maintenance worker, offered to help by creating a power surge that would disrupt the enemy's equipment for a few seconds. His knowledge of the university's electrical systems could give them a small advantage. The other aliens began to believe that maybe the impossible plan could work. They spent an hour preparing for the attack. Daeho showed the aliens how to move quietly through rubble and debris. Jin-woo explained hand signals for coordinating their movements without speaking. Lee So-min mapped out the exact timing needed for each group to reach their positions. The aliens were clumsy at first. Their species had not evolved for stealth and warfare like humans had. But they learned quickly, driven by desperation and the steady confidence of their human leaders. Even Professor Velkor began to move with something resembling military precision. As dawn broke over the ruined campus, the attack began. Jin-woo's group moved like ghosts through the western ruins. Their alien companions followed the humans' lead, amazed at how naturally the young Koreans understood battlefield movement and timing. Lee So-min guided her team through the blind spot she had discovered. Her scanner beeped softly as it detected enemy patrol patterns. She had never received military training, but somehow she understood how to read the flow of battle and find safe paths through danger. Choi Min-ho's diversionary attack started exactly on schedule. Explosions and weapon fire erupted from the east side of the plaza, drawing the attention of every Zephyrian soldier. The enemy command post came alive with activity as officers shouted orders in their harsh language. Deho waited for the perfect moment, then led his team in a desperate charge across the open plaza. Plasma bolts flew overhead, lighting up the gray morning sky. The young Korean student who had been falling asleep in politics class now moved with the deadly precision of a trained warrior. The Zephyrian soldiers trained to expect conventional attacks found themselves facing something entirely new. Small groups of enemies appeared from multiple directions at once, moving in ways that made no tactical sense according to their military doctrine. What followed would be remembered across the galaxy as the moment when humanity announced itself as a true military force in space. The battle was fierce and brief, but its consequences would echo through the stars for generations to come.